Okay, I'm going to speak about life and death today. It's a pretty good day to talk about it. And rebirth as well. But the politics of rebirth, which I think is fascinating. And I hadn't thought about before, but there tends to be some political stuff that goes along with rebirth that we can talk about. So why is rebirth important? For me, when I first heard about rebirth, it was important because I was going to die. And I'm still planning on it. And it was nice to have some place to go. And so rebirth for me was an interesting concept because it wasn't like Christian rebirth. Now, a couple days ago, I was in Glendale, California, and I gave a presentation to the Rotary Club, and it was a lot of fun, and I was well received, and they gave me lunch. So it was a good day. And what I noticed as I looked out is there was like a lot of old people just like me sitting in the audience, and as you get closer to that due date, you start to think about stuff a little differently, prioritize, giving value to certain projects, taking it away from other projects. And so finding out about rebirth and what I needed to do to get reborn in a good way was important. So it was pretty simple. I didn't have to believe in a divine being. I didn't require grace. I didn't even have to have faith, which was really nice. All I needed to do was be a good person. And of course, that is a lifelong pursuit, because I suppose most of us can be good for a short amount of time, and then it's hard to be good after that, because we have desires and we have interesting ways of looking at the world. And we have sankharas, we have habit patterns that keep getting in the way, something we've always done and continue to do until we break that circle. So I have a place to go. I know how to get there, but I'm not sure who goes there, because as I continued to read about Buddhism, it didn't seem like I went, which was a little disappointing because, I had sort of packed and got ready for the trip, and then I wasn't going, but everything else was going. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but also how I first came upon the concept. And it was in a book written in the 70s by David Kalapano, who was at the University of Hawaii, and it's called A Buddhist Philosophy. And I read it in the 80s, and I found a used copy at Bodhi Tree Bookstore, so I even got a chance to save some money. And the book is like little essays on different aspects of Buddhism, and one of the most important essays for me was the fact that our karma is tied directly to our rebirth. Now, Stephen Batchelor has some issues with this idea of karma and rebirth, because the feeling I get is he doesn't think Americans are going to buy into the idea of rebirth or reincarnation, because most of us were brought up in a Christian community, or at least culture, and we have the idea of dying and then going to heaven and staying there forever and ever with friends, relatives, and pets that we've lost. And which is a very pleasant way of looking at it, but I think the problem for the Buddhist is the fact that we have to factor in impermanence and not self. And there's really may not be a place to go at all that we can even conceptualize. Now, the reason I'm saying all of this is because karma is everything we think, everything we say, and everything we do. And the consequences of our karma, the word is vipaka. So we have cause and consequence. And if everything is impermanent, and if there is a not self, if it's simply a process, the person that commits the indiscretion doesn't necessarily feel the results of that. It's the next 2 or 3 people in line that feel the consequences. So is there ever really justice? Can we ever take that person and stick it to them and say, see, that's justice? And probably not, because it's going to be a different person each time we stick it to them. And so how can we even think about being good in this lifetime if the consequences aren't going to affect me, the me of this moment? Wow. This is like a lot of stuff to me at the time when I was reading and thinking. And so then David Kalapano goes into the idea of, well, it's a philosophical issue, this karma thing. And I always love it when they start there, because they can go any place then. So he said, the problem with eternalism, now this is found in Hinduism, not necessarily Buddhism, but there is this sense of soul, this unchanging, independent, unconditional quality that migrates lifetime to lifetime, which has this, and you can identify it. So there's a definite trail that it leaves behind. And you go, okay, if that's the case, if it is eternalism, and if there are tens of thousands of rebirths with this one soul, could it be the case that at some point in the migration from lifetime to lifetime, they aren't going to take it seriously? That this soul says to itself, I'm going to have a wonderful life. I'm going to do everything I want to in this lifetime. And for the next 5 times, I'll just make up for all those indiscretions. So there's a lack of accountability, David Kalapano found, in the idea of eternalism, and that's why we don't use it in Buddhism. Now he also said there's a problem with nihilism, that if this is all there is, if this particular self just lives one lifetime and then ends up feeding the trees, there's also no accountability, because no matter how good or how bad that one self was, the end results are going to be the same, not based on cause and consequence. So it seems that the Buddha came up with a middle path, that he said it's not the same thing that goes from lifetime to lifetime, but there is something that goes from lifetime to lifetime that we need to be aware of. And so he would call this then the energy that migrates. Now in Hinduism, they have a word for the energy that migrates, and it's called Gandharva. And what seems to happen is God takes from one life and transfers to the new life. So there's a God aspect in it. And this didn't make the Buddha feel comfortable, so he took the God out of the transference. And he said there is a quality that migrates from lifetime to lifetime, but it's not independent, it's not unconditional, and it is ever-changing. So it's this energy kind of process, which I label, in my mind, to make it understandable to me, I label this the karmic energy. So this is how I look at it, and you can borrow this if you like. I was speaking, as an aside, as a short digression, I was speaking to an old friend that I hadn't seen for a while today. He was actually giving the talk at our center, and I came over here, and we were talking, and she said, every time I come back, she says, you know, these old habit patterns just sort of kick in. And I said, oh, sankharas. And she took a half step back and said, yes. As if to tell me, of course I know what a sankhara is. It's a habit pattern. And I felt bad that she responded in that way. And oftentimes people respond to me in that way when I add something to the conversation that they already know. And it wasn't that I was trying to one-up her with my Pali or Sanskrit vocabulary. The reason I said that was simply to remind myself that I still knew what the word was. It was really all about me. And I still remembered, and I felt comfortable with that. Because as I get older, I have this idea that I'm going to start forgetting and forgetting and forgetting. And I'll be in just a blissful state of ignorance, just enjoying the world. So, off of the digression, and now we have this issue of rebirth, we have this issue of karma, we have this issue of consequence, we have this issue of justice. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the justice part. In Buddhism, we do not have justice. Perhaps because, there's no one to stick it to after the next moment changes. But more importantly, justice comes about because of a divine lawgiver who defines for us what is right and what is wrong. And so we all, and that movie's coming out in December, about Moses. Looks like a really good one. So he comes with the tablets and says, this is what God said. And so as I was looking at that, I felt a certain freedom of not having to abide by the tablets. That I could pretty much do anything I wanted because we didn't have a divine lawgiver, and there was no justice, and I would never receive my comeuppance. And then I found out about karma and as being a law and a process. So rather than having justice, we have karma, the cause and consequence of what we think, say, and do. And there's a wonderful Facebook quote that I found that said, let karma finish it. We don't have to. We don't have to worry about the ultimate consequence. We can let karma finish it. And in some cases, it won't even be in this lifetime. And that's the deal about multiple lifetimes, is that in order for karma to work, we need to have more than one lifetime. We need to have a past life, a present life, and a future life. And this drives Westerners nuts, because it only seems like now. And these past lives and future lives, if you've ever heard somebody speak about their past lives, they're insane. They were the queen of the Nile, and So it didn't lead to credibility, hearing people speak about their past lives. But when I found out about the idea of karma and past lives, yes, it made sense. Realizing also that a past life can happen consciously and not just physically. That we have who we used to be in this lifetime, we have who we are now in this lifetime, and we have who we will be in this lifetime. We have those three things. Now, I don't know if it's true. I Googled it, but Bill Cosby is having some issues. Because the guy he used to be doesn't seem to be the guy he is today. And I thought to myself, wow, with my life, and the guy I used to be, and how unskillful I used to be, I'm so glad that I meditate and do all the works that I do to counter all the dumb stuff I have done, so I don't have to feel the full impact of the consequences. I can dilute them with my merit and good action, speech, and thoughts. So far, so good, except for how I look. I think this is the direct result of unskillful activity when I was younger. And I look in the mirror and I said, if I could choose, this is not who I would look like. But I don't have the choice. So here we are working with this karma idea, working with eternalism and nihilism, working with the absence of justice, understanding that the world is typically unfair and will always be so. And yet somehow we have to make reason and of all of this stuff that doesn't make any sense at all. And so we have baggage. We have the baggage of the Buddhist. We have a lot of bags. We have 100 books. We have many retreats for some of us under our belt. We have thousands of Dharma talks that we've listened to. All those have given us this wonderful baggage to carry with us and make sense of the insanity of our life. Thankfully, we don't have to carry that baggage, at least most of it, to the next lifetime. But we will be carrying some of it. We will be carrying the consequences of what we thought, said, and done, and those will migrate to the next lifetime. And now we come to this idea of who's being reborn. There's a wonderful German monk. I have his essay here. And the essay is on rebirth and the Gandharva. Okay, so Gandharva is the Hindu god transfers. Gandharva is the energy being transferred one lifetime to the next. Now, it was there for political reasons, according to this monk, and he read the commentaries. So let me sort of point it out and then go into the politics of it, because for me this was just fascinating. So I'm reading about the Gandharva years ago, and I said, okay, so that's the thing that migrates from lifetime to lifetime, and it is my karmic energy, and I am like in this relay race, okay, and I have this baton, which I'll call the energy baton, and I keep handing it off to the next runner in my life. So I have all these people who are running, and I'm one of them right now in this very moment. I'm holding my baton, and in the next moment I hand it off, and the next person who resembles me takes the baton and does their lap, and then they hand it off, and then they hand it off, and then they hand it off. And so, like, who's there? You know? Who will I be tomorrow? You know? And I just assume it's going to be similar to who I am today. But to be honest with you, 2 months ago I woke up and I realized I wasn't the same person that went to sleep the night before. That was dramatic. Now, I can't tell you how I was different, but I just I wasn't that same person. And I haven't gone back yet. So maybe that was one of the legs of my journey, and then I'll have another chance to go to sleep and wake up a different person again. But sometimes the differences are so minute that it's not obvious. But I'm sure that's the case. And that's why people who meditate a lot don't sleep very much. Because they're really working on the one person who's still awake. And they don't want to lose them at night, just in case they don't wake up the same way. So we have this idea of, okay, this energy now migrates to the next lifetime, which is the problem we all have. Our suffering starts because we're born. That's the beginning. If we weren't born, we would never suffer. But being born is nice. You know, it gives us something to do until we die again. So birth brings what? Birth brings sickness, brings old age if you live long enough, and it brings death. Every time. Every time. So when the Buddha achieved his nirvana underneath the Bodhi tree, it said that one of his realizations was being able to look back and see 100,000 lifetimes that he had lived. Now, I am thinking, wouldn't that be just a trip? To look at all those lifetimes. None of them would really be you. They would all be the people you used to be, or all the things you used to be. But apparently there's only one you, and it only happens the moment that you're there, and then in the very next moment, somebody else takes your place. So we have this birth, and birth becomes a big deal also in Paticca Samuppada, the 12-link chain of causation. Birth is one of the links. Birth is one of the links that describes why we suffer. Okay, so now we get this birth thing here. So here we are, and it's not the same person from the last lifetime. It's a brand new person this lifetime. With tendencies and a few issues and a little predestination of how it might be in the next moment. But the Buddha said, we're not stuck. nothing is predetermined. There is no fatalism in Buddhism. That every moment we are awake and make a choice, the future changes. We do not have to be chained to the past. We have total freedom depending on the choices we make. But a lot of us make the choice to continue the way we were because we have sankharas, which are habit patterns, and I'm just reminding myself. And and that's why we continue to do the same things over and over again. So right now, upstairs, they're building rooms to talk people out of continuing their sankharas. We will have counseling to end the sankharas and create some new ones. Wonderful. Takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. Okay, so then you die, and then you're reborn again, and then you die, and then you're reborn again, and you go through this terrible fate of birth and death until finally you achieve nirvana, and all future rebirths now have ended, your karma has ended, your suffering has ended, you're like in the best place ever. And when that person dies, they go into nirvana forever, which I think is a parallel universe that doesn't require birth or creation to enter. It simply requires nirvana. And because nirvana is unborn and undying, you'll never get old, you'll never get sick, but you probably won't recognize anybody either. And that may not be a bad thing. I don't know if we need to be with the same people for eternity. What are we going to learn? What are we going to talk about? What are we going to do that we haven't done a million times before? I think it would be nice just to have it the first time every time. Just my opinion. So now let's throw some politics in here. The Buddha was very outspoken about certain things. And it's surprising that he didn't meet his end in a tragic way, that nobody took him out. For me, the Buddha is like Martin Luther. He's the reformer. Hinduism had some issues. And one of the main issues that the Buddha kept talking about, which is found in both the theories of karma and rebirth and the idea of Gandhabba and rebirth, is the fact that the caste system wasn't real. That they said, if you are born into a family of Brahmins, being the priestly caste, you were there because of past karma, and it was your right and your duty to be a Brahmin. But it also worked the same way with the workers, the untouchables. If you were born in that caste, you could never get out. There was no upward mobility. You were stuck lifetime after lifetime because the same person was being reborn, or the same soul was being reborn time and time and time again. Now, the Buddha said, but there isn't a person there. There's not an individual, an unconditional element that's reborn time and time again. It's always the first time. It's always somebody different. And I thought to myself, as I was reading this, whoa, this is an amazing statement to make. In spite of all the evidence to the contrary 2,600 years ago in the Hindu or Brahmin system, he stood up and said, no, a man or a woman should be given value not because of their birth, but because of what they think, say, and do, their karma. That each and every person has the ability to achieve nirvana. It isn't just the priestly caste. And each gender has the ability to achieve nirvana, which was something radical as well. So for me, being born in Iowa, I just wanted to have some place to go. And I thought, yeah, this is so cool because I do have some place to go, and there's 30 heavens and there's 30 hells, and there's karma, so I don't need justice, And there is this consciousness or karmic energy that's being reborn time and time again. So I don't need to worry about that. I don't need a divine being to forgive me or to have grace. I simply need to be skillful in whatever I think, say, or do, moment by moment, every time I manifest. Okay, so there you go. And this allowed me, as a religious Buddhist, to embrace this concept. But if you're not a religious Buddhist, if you're a secular Buddhist, or a philosophical Buddhist, or a lifestyle Buddhist, or a therapeutic Buddhist, you might have some issues with this afterlife thing. And I keep running into all these brick walls with people who have decided they're not going to believe in any kind of afterlife. And I think it's fine. But the problem with that is you have to die. And I think it's much easier to die if you think you're going someplace, even if you're not. But you don't know. It's just a story. Everything we hear, see, read, feel, they're just stories. There's no truth involved at all. We're making it up. People always ask me, do you believe in what you say? And I say, I believe it to be Buddhist. That's all I'm required to do. I don't have to read everything in Buddhism and say, yes, it's true or not true. My job is to say, is this what the Buddha said, or is this similar to what the Buddha said? Could this be viewed as what the Buddha said? Because if you're on Facebook, the Buddha said a lot of stuff. So I don't know if it's true. I don't know if any of it's true. And the only truth that we can get out of this is the relative truth of intellectual understanding. That's the relative truth. Intellectual understanding. We can understand this to be true because it fits the model of intellectual understanding, and it's dualistic. And because it's dualistic, we understand, because there's more than one. But that's not the only truth the Buddha spoke about. The Buddha spoke about the ultimate truth, which has no words, can only be directly experienced. And in trying to interpret that direct experience to others, you keep falling back on relative truth, which ends up to simply be the finger pointing and never ever what it's pointing at. So when I read this and print it out, and when I understand the reference points, and when I understand the political aspects, and when I understand all of this, it's simply I just understand it in my way. We all have our own way of understanding everything. Sometimes it's similar enough. We understand stuff similar enough that we form groups, like Democrats, Republicans, or Buddhists and Christians. And we have all these groups because we have a similar understanding of the truth, until that direct experience challenges us, and we may have a paradigm clash and come to a new conclusion and forever be something else. Which is, I guess, called personal growth and evolution. So we don't want to get stuck. We don't want to be dogmatic. We want to see the truth as it is today at a relative level. We'd like to experience the truth as it is today at an ultimate level, perhaps through meditation. And then we all get a cup of coffee and continue our day. We got a lot of stuff to do. We just can't be thinking about this stuff all the time. Unless you're in the business. I'm a professional. So I'm going to stop there.